so it seems my mic is working, right? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Razaki, for that very generous introduction. And thank you, Dr. Davis-Mathias, for inviting me to come here. And so I'm very happy to be here. I love your campus. It's so beautiful. And I also want to thank my own students. Some of my own students made the trek from DePaul to come out here. So it's nice to see you all here. Make sure you say hi to me afterwards if you haven't already. So today I was really happy to get an invitation for this talk because what really interests me about Islamic finance is the more philosophical and theological questions related to Islam, related to religion in general, and related to personal value systems and how they play out in a business setting. So I think you guys do a lot of interesting work here in that arena, so I'm looking forward to the discussion. The first thing people tend to ask me when they find out I study Islamic finance is how in the world I got into this field. I don't really look like people think an Islamic banker should look, and it's just kind of confusing. So I won't give you the whole story, but the short version is that I've always had an interest in social service kind of projects. From a very young age, I was always involved in church projects. I grew up Methodist. And when I got to business school, I felt a little bit out of place. This was a while ago when greed was still the main buzzword in a business school and before the ethics movement had really picked up. And I discovered microfinance. And that brought to me a picture of the business world that could include a value, something in its value system other than profit making. So my general interest is social aspects of business and how can you do business in a way that's also good for society. And so when I worked in banking here in Chicago for a while, then I moved to Dubai in the United Arab Emirates and worked in private equity, and we had some Islamic finance transactions in the company I worked in. And so I started to say, well, this is really interesting, but why? The money sort of moves around the same way, and so what's the deal with this Islamic finance? So when I finally got back to Chicago and I was in my PhD program, which was actually a psychology and human development program, I started to ask myself systematically, okay, wait a minute, Islam started about 1400 years ago, but Islamic finance is a really new industry. It's been around at the time it had been around about 30 years. And I said, that's what really interests me. Why do we need Islamic finance now? And there wasn't the need for something called Islamic finance, 1400 years ago. So that was the starting point for asking myself questions about the industry. So what I'd like to do today is first give you just a very brief recap of Islam. I find most people these days know the basics of Islam, but I just want to get us all on the same page for a few minutes. So bear with me if I'm repeating something you already know. Next, I'll give you an introduction to Islamic finance in the context of, introduction to Islam and introduction to Islamic legal thought, and that's kind of important. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but it's important to how the industry conceives of itself. Then I will talk a little bit about Islamic finance and some of the challenges the industry and its practitioners face in a global economy and in today's contemporary world. Okay, so starting off, you all are probably aware that Islam is a monotheistic religion in the tradition of Judaism and Christianity. As Dr. Razaki says, 1.25, 1.5 billion Muslims around the world. And something that surprises a lot of people, only about 20% of Muslims are Arab. So I think that's important to point out because it's a very diverse religion. Muslims are a very diverse population around the world. And I think we tend, from media exposure, to sort of see it as a homogenous religion, and its adherence is very much similar. But something that really plays out in Islamic finance is this great diversity of people and cultures around the world who are Muslim. Okay, so You probably know the 5 pillars of Islam, and these are actually very important to the religion. And they're also important because they are active, they are actions. And the most important thing to do in Islam is to profess your faith by showing your actions. And so when I think of Islamic finance, and when the founders of Islamic finance started to conceive of the industry, they were thinking in terms of what you do in your daily activities is an important part of expressing your faith. And so I want to point out these 5 pillars, and that they are important actions that Muslims are required to take. Okay, primary focus in Islam is on justice, social responsibility, and ethics in general as defined by its texts and traditions. Muslims do believe in life after death. And there are 2 categories for actions in Islam. The first, ibadat, is personal behavior in your faith. It's basically the relationship between you and God and Allah. And the second category refers to relationships in society, relationships between human beings. And Islamic finance is mostly concerned with the second, the mu'amalat, social laws, how you treat other people. Okay, 5 categories of human behavior, ranging from the obligatory, the 5 pillars, to the forbidden, which are called haram activities. And you'll notice when I get into Islamic finance, forbidden activities are specifically referred to as haram activities. Okay, Islamic law. A couple of terms to keep straight. The Sharia is the divine pronouncement of Islamic law. This is the word of Allah pronounced to Muhammad, his prophet, and written down in the Quran. And the words you read in the Quran today are exactly the same words that were revealed to the prophet 1400 years ago. That has not changed. What does change, quite often, is something called fiqh, which is the human interpretation of those laws. And so this is where we get all the excitement in any part of life, but especially for us in Islamic finance. Okay, so when you're going to evaluate a new situation according to Islamic law, you have basically 4 avenues available to you. When you have a question about some kind of behavior, like is it appropriate to charge interest, for example, you would first go to the Quran, and you would see if the Quran addresses this issue of charging interest. It happens to in this situation. But say if it didn't address charging interest, maybe something like derivatives, options, puts or calls in the financial system today. You would go to the Quran and see if there is a specific prescription for what to do with derivatives. If there's nothing in the Quran, you go secondly to the Hadith, which are stories told by the Prophet to either clarify something that was in the Quran or to clarify a situation that had not been addressed before. If there's nothing there, you look to the consensus of scholars. And finally, if the scholars can't come up with a consensus, and due to that diversity, it's sometimes hard to come up with a consensus, you would look to a process called ijtihad, which is a personal process of reasoning. And in Islamic finance, you hear a lot about ijtihad because often you have individual people living in various parts of the world with little access to scholars and who need to make their own decisions about certain actions.